Get ready for an emotional roller coaster. Welcome to Sheikh Hamdan's Fans official channel, where today we're honored to share a heartfelt poem penned by Sheikh Hamdan, a soulful tribute to his lost love, Hadia. As I reflect on my childhood, I remember my dad as a pillar of strength, a man of unwavering principles. His opinions on life, relationships, and the kind of person I should be with were always clear-cut. Though he rarely interfered, when he did, his words carried immense weight. So, when I finally mustered the courage to tell him about Hadia, I was a nervous wreck. That day is etched in my memory forever. I sat across from him, fidgeting with my hands, my heart racing with anticipation. He listened intently, his face a mask of calmness, his eyes piercing with a deep understanding. The silence was palpable, and I could feel the weight of his gaze upon me. Little did I know, that conversation would be a turning point in my life, one that would shape my understanding of love, loss, and the complexities of the human heart. The silence that followed was oppressive, punctuated only by my father's measured sigh. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "You think this is love?" he asked, his voice low and even, yet laced with a hint of skepticism. I nodded, my heart pounding in anticipation of his response. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his gaze piercing as he searched for something. Then, with a subtle shake of his head, he began to speak. "Love is not just a fleeting feeling, a momentary high. It's about weathering the storms together, about trusting each other when the world outside is chaotic. At its core, love is about knowing the true character of the person you're with, about seeing who they are when no one is watching." His words were a gentle rebuke, a reminder that love was more than just a feeling. I sensed his reservations, his unspoken doubts about Hadia and me. He didn't explicitly disapprove, but his tone conveyed a deep-seated concern. "You're young," he continued, his voice softening. "You see the good, the excitement of new love, but have you thought about the challenges, the struggles that will inevitably come? Have you considered the differences between you, the things that will test your love?" His questions hung in the air, a gentle challenge to my starry-eyed optimism. For a moment, I wanted to argue, to tell him that love could conquer all. But something about his expression, a deep wisdom etched on his face, gave me pause. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that he might be right, that love was more complex, more nuanced than I had ever imagined. My father's words carried the weight of his life experiences, a depth of understanding that I was only beginning to grasp. He had navigated the complexities of love, loss, and growth, and his insights were a precious gift. "People change," he said, his voice laced with a mix of sadness and wisdom. "And sometimes, love isn't enough to stop that change." His words lingered within me, a gentle reminder that love is a dynamic force, one that requires effort, understanding, and patience. As time passed, I found myself torn between two opposing desires. A part of me yearned to prove my father wrong, to demonstrate that love could indeed conquer all. Yet, another part of me acknowledged the wisdom in his words, recognizing that he wasn't trying to be difficult, but rather, to protect me from the potential heartaches that lay ahead. His doubts lingered, a subtle undercurrent that occasionally surfaced in his watchful gaze. There were moments when I felt an overwhelming conviction that love would be enough, that it would overcome any obstacle. And yet, there were also times when I wondered if my father had been right all along, if I was merely seeing what I wanted to see. One thing, however, remained certain. My father's concerns weren't merely about approval or disapproval. They were rooted in his experience, his ability to see beyond the emotions, and his understanding that love is a journey, not a destination. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I found myself reflecting on my father's words, weighing his insights against my own experiences. I felt an overwhelming urge to discuss my feelings with him, to seek his guidance and reassurance. And though I couldn't bring myself to ask him directly, I knew that his words would continue to resonate within me, a reminder that love is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of joy, sorrow, and growth. I had been naive, but deep down, I already knew the truth. My father's response was unnecessary. His reservations were evident in the cautious glances he cast my way, the subtle shifts in conversation whenever I brought up the topic, and his quiet, observant demeanor. He didn't intend to hurt me or control me. He was simply waiting for me to acknowledge what he already knew, that my love was fragile, vulnerable to the tests of time and reality. As the days turned into weeks, the facade of perfection began to crack. Small, insignificant arguments escalated into full-blown conflicts, with angry words lingering long after the storm had passed. The realization dawned on me that love, in itself, was not a panacea for all our troubles. The fissures in our relationship, once hairline cracks, began to spread, threatening to shatter the very foundations of our love. The signs were subtle at first, but they were there, the faint whispers of a love that was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. I attempted to brush off the doubts, reminding myself that no relationship is perfect and that struggles are an inevitable part of love. But deep down, a subtle shift had begun to occur within me. One evening, as my dad and I sat on the porch, watching the sky darken, he sensed the turmoil brewing inside me. Without looking at me, he said, "You don't have to tell me anything, I know." The lump in my throat threatened to choke me as I swallowed hard, unable to deny the truth. My dad's words hung in the air, a gentle reminder that he had always seen more than I gave him credit for. I wanted to protest, to tell him that my love was still strong, that I wasn't giving up. But my silence spoke volumes. He rubbed his palms together, a soft groan escaping his lips. "Love is lovely," he whispered, "but it shouldn't cause you to lose who you are." His words struck a chord deep within me, and in that instant, I realized how much of myself I had sacrificed in an attempt to prove him wrong. The question tumbled out of my lips, barely audible above a whisper. "Do you think I should leave?" My dad took his time to respond, his gaze piercing as he searched for the right words. "I think," he said carefully, "that love should make you feel safe, like home. Not like a battlefield." His words hung in the air, a gentle challenge to my perceptions. I stared at him, processing the weight of his wisdom, as the darkness gathered around us like a shroud. His words lingered, a gentle echo that refused to fade. Perhaps, I thought, he wasn't urging me to leave, but rather, reminding me of a truth I had forgotten. Love isn't just about clinging to something, fighting to keep it alive. It's also about knowing when to surrender, when to acknowledge that the battle is lost. And maybe, just maybe, my dad had been trying to tell me that all along. That love shouldn't be a war, but a sanctuary. The days blurred together, yet my dad's words remained etched in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been trying to guide me towards a profound realization. Love shouldn't feel like a battlefield, scarred and ravaged by conflict. Instead, it should feel like home, a place of refuge, of peace, of unconditional acceptance. As I pondered his words, I began to see my relationship in a new light, and the truth was both exhilarating and terrifying. I tried to convince myself that the love we shared was worth fighting for, that every relationship has its ups and downs, and that my doubts were merely temporary. But the truth was, my heart felt heavy more often than it felt light. I swallowed my thoughts to avoid the inevitable fight, and instead, I began to pay attention to the little things I had been ignoring for so long. The way I tiptoed around my emotions, afraid to express myself. The way I constantly sought reassurance, never feeling secure. Was this what love was supposed to be? One night, as I sat alone in my room, I picked up my phone and hesitated before calling my dad. It was late, but I knew he'd answer. He always did. "Hey," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't say anything for a moment, but I could hear his steady breathing on the other end. Then, softly, he said, "You're ready to talk, aren't you?" Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking. For the first time, I poured my heart out to him, telling him everything, the love, the happiness, the good moments, but also the exhaustion, the doubt, the fear of admitting that maybe this wasn't as right as I wanted it to be. My dad listened attentively, without interrupting or judging. He simply let me talk, and when I was done, he said, "Love shouldn't hurt like this." His words were a gentle reminder that I deserved better, that I deserved to be happy. As we sat in silence, I realized that I wasn't a failure for leaving. I was learning, growing, and giving myself permission to choose the kind of love I truly deserved. My dad's words echoed in my mind. Loving someone isn't the same as losing yourself for them. In that moment, I knew I wasn't giving up on love. I was giving myself permission to choose a love that felt like home, not a war one had to keep winning. "Come home," my dad said gently, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I belonged. I woke up the next morning with an odd feeling of clarity, a sense of peace that wasn't quite there yet, but was getting closer. It was a silent realization that admitting I had hung on for too long was more courageous than I thought, and that sometimes, letting go is the bravest thing we can do. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing with the weight of my dad's words, "Come home." I yearned to, but it wasn't that simple. Memories, promises, and hopes lingered, making it difficult to let go. I had convinced myself that sacrifice was necessary for love, that things would change if I just put in more effort. But the truth was, love wasn't something I had to earn. It was time to stop trying to prove myself. With a deep breath, I stood up and began packing, the weight of each item lifting with every step. It was as if I was shedding the skin of my past, letting go of the remnants of a love that had slowly suffocated me. The letters, the mementos, the promises, what was I supposed to do with them? Keep them as a reminder, discard them, or ignore them like a chapter I didn't need to read again? The questions swirled, but I knew I had to keep moving. My hands trembled as I finished packing, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen before I finally typed out the message, "I'm leaving." The words stared back at me, taunting me. Was this really the end? Was this the moment I walked away from something I had fought so hard for? But then I thought of all the times I had felt alone, all the times I had sacrificed my own happiness to hold on to something that wasn't holding on to me. Suddenly, pressing send didn't feel so hard anymore. The minutes ticked by, and my phone remained silent. Maybe that was my answer. I grabbed my bag, took one last look around, and walked out the door. The trip home seemed to stretch on forever, the road ahead unknown and endless. But with each passing mile, I felt lighter, shedding the weight of my doubts and fears. The pressure of trying to fix something that had been shattering me slowly lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom. As I pulled into my dad's driveway, I saw him waiting for me, his arms open and his face calm. I knew in that moment that I had made the right decision. He enveloped me in a warm hug before I had even stepped out of the car, his silence speaking volumes. The steady beat of his heart against my ear, the quiet comfort of being home, it all washed over me, and I breathed. At that moment, I knew I was finally home, not just physically, but emotionally, too. My dad's arms were a sanctuary, a refuge from the storms that had ravaged my heart. As I held him, I felt the fragments of my shattered self slowly coming together, like the pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. The tears I had held back for so long began to flow, a cathartic release of all the pain, the doubt, and the fear. My dad held me close, his warmth and love seeping into my very being, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt at peace. A huge thank you to each and every one of you for being part of our community. We're grateful for your love and support, and we're thrilled that you've enjoyed our content. If you want to stay up to date on all the latest updates, behind-the-scenes insights, and exclusive content, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment below. Your engagement means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more exciting videos with you in the future. Stay tuned.